Play action. Bennett looks down the middle. McConkey's wide open. Touchdown, Dogs.
Hello, everybody, and welcome in to this video about the Nebraska Cornhuskers, a team that last year was also a disappointment. We remember how that year started with that game in Dublin, Ireland, the Big Ten game against Northwestern, the only game that the Northwestern Wildcats won. But I feel like with Mickey Joseph as interim coach after they got rid of Scott Frost after the massive disappointment of a loss against Georgia Southern, they ended up finding a little bit of hope, and they looked a little bit better, and they ended up ending the season with a win against Iowa, spoiling their chances at a Big Ten title berth. Now, that was still a little bit of a long shot, but hey, it happened. So like I said, my name is Colin Bashnigel. You can check us out on Twitch at @bash_LSN, just like you see it right there. You can also check out my podcast feed, and the same exact tag at @bash_LSN is my TikTok. And then why is Twitch important? Because I stream these live when I record them. So if you want to bring a conversation, you can come in and see. Later tonight, I will be doing Kansas. So you can keep your eye on the Kansas Jayhawks. That might be around 8 or 9 Eastern later on tonight. And then tomorrow morning, or I guess afternoon-ish, maybe push to the evening, but sometime tomorrow, we will be doing the Ohio State Buckeyes, and Georgia Tech will be on deck. If I don't get to them tomorrow as well, they'll be here as soon as I possibly can on Monday. So expect for that around 5 o'clock Eastern. There should definitely be a live stream on Monday, 5 o'clock Eastern. I will try to give you information as I know it. My schedule does change all the time, but I also tell people, hey, I'm prioritizing what I'm doing here. So as we talk about Nebraska, I just want to ask for you to like and subscribe. Make sure that you check out all of our stuff on Loudmouth Sports, all of the stuff in the playlist that I am linking right here. I pointed to the wrong side of the screen, but right there is going to be the playlist for this series of previews and predictions. And you can also check out my good pal, Tyler Isley LSN. Just how it sounds is how it's spelled. Don't overthink it there. But let's talk about the Nebraska Cornhuskers. We're going to talk about their key departures first before we go to the transfer portal. So to the NFL, they lost wide receiver Trey Palmer and tight end Travis Vokalek. Now, we'll talk about tight end a little bit later when we do the roster preview, but they lost 2 edge rushers, which was massive blows, in O'Shawn Mathis as well as edge rusher Garrett Nelson. Now, guys who transferred out, they had a lot of guys transfer out, and you start with both the quarterbacks. Starting with Casey Thompson, he left for FAU, and then Logan Smothers is going to Jacksonville State, not Jackson State, Jacksonville State. And then they lost 2 running backs, Ajay Allen going to Miami, and Yaquez Yant going to Florida A&M. How about the wide receivers? They lost 4 of them, again, to a little bit smaller schools. Dakotas Crawford, coolest name in college football, if you ask a whole lot of people. He's going to Louisiana Tech to play for Sonny Cumbie out there. Alante Brown is transferring within conference to Michigan State, in which that's a road trip that the Nebraska Cornhuskers have to take. Victor Jones Jr. to Liberty for Jamie Chadwell's first year, and then Camonte Grimes to UNI, Northern Iowa. Staying on the offensive side, they lost 2 offensive linemen, tackle Brant Banks and guard Kevin Williams. Brant Banks went to Rice and Williams went to Charlotte. On the defensive side of the ball, Stephon Wynn and Marquise Black are 2 defensive tackles who left. Wynn over to Ole Miss and Black to Western Kentucky. Linebacker Ernest Hausman, a very big-time transfer, a huge loss for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, definitely the biggest loss they had. He transferred to the Michigan Wolverines. 2 secondary players going to Syracuse. That would be cornerback Jaden Gold and Jaleel Martin, the safety. And finally, kicker Charlie Weinrich, which we are doing Kansas next. He's going to Kansas. Now we are going to talk about guys who have transferred in to the Nebraska Cornhuskers football program. I'm going to change the brand back to the block because I feel like that's taking up way too much space down there. Transferring in here, we're going to have quarterback Jeff Sims coming in from Georgia Tech. Massive get, if you ask me. I think his talent and his ceiling is huge, and I think he's going to thrive in this system. Tight end Eric Gilbert comes in from Georgia, also a five-star kid. I hope he figures it out. I said that in the Georgia video. Wide receivers Billy Kemp from Virginia and Josh Fleeks from Baylor. More on the wide receiver room when we preview that roster. They brought in, as they attack the portal with transfer tackles, they brought in Ben Scott from Arizona State, Jacob Hood from Georgia, and Tyler Knack from Utah, all three tackles. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, they brought in another Georgia transfer in edge rusher, MJ Sherman. So that is, the third Georgia transfer that they have. And then defensive lineman Elijah Judy from Texas A&M comes in. Linebacker Chief Borders comes in from Florida, but then you also have cornerback Corey Collier from Florida as well, and also from Florida, long snapper Marco Ortiz. That concludes the transferring in portion of it. So we are going to talk about this current team for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. So, of course, you know that Jeff Sims is likely going to be the starter here at quarterback. Now, behind him, you have Henrik Harburg, I think it's Harburg. And then you also have Chuba Purdy, who's been here for now his second year. I believe he transferred in last season from Florida State, if I remember correctly. So their quarterback position, I think they're pretty comfortable with. Now, Jeff Sims being a little bit different than those other guys, a lot more dynamic of an athlete, but he can throw the ball. Don't sleep on that for sure. Then you have Gabe Irvin as a guy, and then Anthony Grant also as two guys who's trying to take the running back role. I was somewhat impressed with Anthony Grant. I felt like he flashed last year as an experienced player. I think he could take a huge step forward here, but I'm curious to see what Gabe Irvin does because I'm not too familiar with Gabe Irvin myself. At tight end, I think they're pretty good. You do have Eric Gilbert coming in, and you also have Nate Borkircher. I think it's Borkircher. I hope I didn't butcher that. And then you have Janarian Bonner, who are two really good players in my opinion. Now you have some younger players as well, like Thomas Fidone and Braden Clover. I guess they're not younger, but they're less experienced on the field. Now, Janarian Bonner is a kind of a new guy that's going to fit the system here. Now, I'm hoping, again, that Eric Gilbert kind of achieves what he needs to and becomes one of the rotational guys at the tight end position for Matt Rhule's offense. And by the way, just a side note here, I think this offense could be really good if they find a couple of dynamic playmakers out wide, and it will help the tight ends for sure if those safeties kind of have to help on the outside. Now, talking about those wide receivers, I love the pickup of Billy Kemp out of Virginia in the slot here. I think he's going to start there. And you also have Joshua Fleeks, who has the ability to play in the slot, both the transfers from Baylor and Virginia, massive pickups as far as fit goes. Now, Isaiah Garcia Castaneda was a guy who was about to transfer, but he ended up coming back. And I think he could be a guy that's a pretty good depth piece for them. I think Xavier Betts is also a pretty solid player, and I know for a fact Marcus Washington is a really good wide receiver. Malachi Coleman, a true freshman, is a guy I'm picking to break out here on the offensive side. The only offensive player that I'm saying, hey, we have not seen him play college ball or not seen him play college ball too much. I think he could potentially have a big year, 400-plus yards potentially. I think he's going to get more playing time as the season goes along. On the offensive line, I am a little bit concerned about tackle. Again, they attacked the tackle position with some backups from other places, such as a Jacob Hood, for example. But you really are looking at Bryce Benhart as a true starter, and that's final. That is what's going to happen. Outside of that, though, I'm not sure. They are also, having a couple of freshmen like Mason Goldman and Gunnar Gatula battling for that starting spot. But overall, you got to probably give the nod at that left tackle spot to Bryce Benhart, Jacob Hood, or Teddy Prochaska. I think I said that right. Now, I have not seen any of these dudes play. Benhart was a starter last year, or at least a rotational guy last year. But I've not seen anybody else at tackle play, and they don't have college football experience like that. Jacob Hood buried in the depth chart, right? Gunnar Gatula, Mason Goldman, both true freshmen, and then Teddy Prochaska, I don't think really played at all last year on this Nebraska team. Now, I do like the interior. Ben Scott, the redshirt junior here, he is a guy that I think could make a huge impact at center, be an experienced player that can help. And so will Noradin Nawili. Okay, I think he is a huge point in the middle. Turner Corcoran is a really good player in the middle as well. These guys are coming back from last year's team. These guys could potentially hold down that offensive line and definitely help the run game, especially if Irvin and Grant are exactly what I think they could be, with Jeff Sims having the threat of running the ball. Now, on the defensive side, they brought in freshman Prince Will Milan. I practiced this name a little bit to make sure I had it right, but his film is absolutely outstanding. Now, the thing about Prince Will Milan, again, hard name to pronounce. He played in Texas with some pretty solid competition out there, and I think he's a plug-and-play player. I think he's going to play immediately. Now, what I've heard was Cameron Lenhart is also another player that's a true freshman that might end up moving more inside in a 3-4 system, but don't get it twisted. That's mostly him playing more on the inside leverage in over sets or kind of offset 3-4s where you have one linebacker up towards the line of scrimmage and the other three in a row back there in the 3-4 or 3-3-5. Now, talking about those linebackers, MJ Sherman likely going to be a starter, a senior from Georgia. Chief Borders going to back him up on the outside. Luke Reamer is back for this team, and so is Nick Henrik. I think they're really solid on the linebacker group, and excuse me there. I think they have a whole lot of depth, and they brought in players that fit what they want to do, because you have John Bullock also back, Garrett Snodgrass also back. And like I said, you brought in Chief Borders, you brought in MJ Sherman. This linebacker group is the strength of the defense. Now, in the secondary, you have that rover position, the hybrid. Isaac Gifford, is probably going to play that position. Javen Wright is going to give him a little bit of run there. But Quentin Newsome and Malcolm Hartzog. Now, we don't know much about Hartzog. We know Newsome has been a starter for this Nebraska defense, but Hartzog is a guy that I think needs to have an absolute great jump from year 1 to year 2, because, hey, he shined a little bit as a freshman playing rotationally. Hartzog needs to be a breakout player, and he's my pick for a potential breakout player. Now, Prince Will, Milan, and Cameron Lenhart are two guys on the edge / just the defensive line that absolutely need to break out, because they do not have that experience or depth on the defensive line. So Hartzog is going to be massive for how long he could potentially cover. Marquez Buford and Omar Brown are back at the safety position. You also have Corey Collier back there, the transfer that we talked about, and the Miles Farmers also back. So when you talk about this Nebraska team, I worry about this defense a little bit, and I talked about the breakout players. Again, Malachi Coleman on the offensive side, wide receiver, true freshman. I think he could have a pretty solid year. And Prince Will Milan and also Cameron Lenhart are two defensive linemen that will play immediately and need to break out for this team to have a chance to do great things. And then Malcolm Hartzog, he's a cornerback. Watch out for him. All right. So the over-under right now stated at 6.5 wins. We'll get back to that, but that's where Vegas sees the Nebraska Cornhuskers sitting at. So with that being said, let's get to the prediction of the Nebraska Cornhuskers. So you start on the road Thursday night against Minnesota, and to the left, it's a little bit cut off. Oh, well, I did my best. I think that they beat Minnesota on the road. I think this is going to be somewhat of a high-scoring game, but I don't think that Minnesota offense is going to be nearly as explosive as Nebraska. They're kind of having to replace a little bit on the defensive side. I just don't trust what they are bringing back on offense, even though I think Nebraska's defense could struggle early. That's a concern for me. Now, Colorado versus Nebraska, I also think will be a shootout, but I do think Nebraska is a better team at this moment. Look, they just have more pieces coming back, and I think the biggest difference when we talked about Colorado is they do not have a whole lot of depth, and they don't have a lot of experience in the front 4 to get pressure on a mobile quarterback at that, and Jeff Sims, they're really going to struggle seeing a quarterback like Jeff Sims. I mean, I think he's better than Chandler Morris, and Morris is a pretty daggum good player, but playing both those guys back-to-back, it's going to be tough for Colorado. I think they beat NIU. I think NIU could potentially, have a pretty decent year in the MAC, but nowhere near competing with Nebraska if Nebraska doesn't choke like they had in the past. And then they play against Louisiana Tech. I think they win there playing against Dakotas Crawford, who we talked about. But, this Louisiana Tech program, I don't really see a trajectory going up for them right now. So I'm going to pick Nebraska in that game. Now, at home against Michigan could be dangerous because this is one of 2 back-to-back road games for Michigan. It's the first time that they're hitting the road. It's going to be a super tough environment. Play this game at night. It's a better chance for you, but I'm taking the Michigan Wolverines in that game because they are a better team than the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And then at Illinois, off a short week, Friday night in Champaign, I think this is going to be one of the most rocking environments that Illinois is going to have all year. And I think that team really shows out and shows a lot on that Friday night that, any hardcore college football fan or not even hardcore could be a pretty casual college football fan. If they ain't at high school football games, they're going to be at home watching this. So going into the bye, you are 4-2 after 2 consecutive losses. I do think that Northwestern is improved, but I think Nebraska should win that game with their explosive offense. I think they will just have too many athletes in the skill position for Northwestern to really keep up. I do expect for that Purdue game to maybe be a little bit of a challenge just because it's a lull in the middle of the schedule. But overall, I still think that they're a better team than Purdue, and I think they pull that one out to, guess what, make a bowl game for the first time since 2019, I think. I don't think they made one in 2020. Did they even make one in 19? I can't even remember. But regardless, bowl game for Nebraska in a very long time. It has not happened in a while. I still have you losing to Michigan State. For as much as I think Michigan State's going to struggle early, and I think it's going to be a little bit pieced together, I still think Mel Tucker's a pretty good coach. A lot of people are hating on him. I think he's just overpaid. Doesn't mean he's a bad football coach. So I'm going to take Sparty in this game because I think they're going to be clicking a little bit better. The schedule dynamics set up better. And I just talked about Purdue with it being a lull in the schedule. I think they sleepwalk through this Michigan State game. But they wake up for the Maryland game. Maryland having to travel from East Coast to the Midwest in a tough situation in mid-November. I think they beat the Maryland Terrapins to improve to 7-3. And they could be borderline ranked at this point. Now, the thing about that is you look at the wins that they have, the W's that they have. Does anybody look like they're 100% going to be a top 25 team or an impressive win? The answer is no. So I don't think they're going to be ranked. I think they want to play spoiler in Camp Randall for a Wisconsin team that may or may not be contending in the West. And maybe at this point, I know they have 3 losses in Big Ten play, but you never know how wacky things can get in the West. Maybe Nebraska's right in the thick of it too. I do think Wisconsin wins, though. I think the offensive line is going to be really talented, and the big difference here is I think especially in late November, that plays into Luke Fickell's hands with that defense absolutely peaking late in the season. And then finally, Iowa. I think Iowa gets their revenge even in Memorial Stadium. This could be a tough game for sure, but I think this Iowa team has significantly improved. I also think that Iowa is, going to be thinking about that game. Every single year that we play this game on the last week of the season, the rivalry between these 2 border states gets more and more intense. A rivalry that never existed before Nebraska joined the Big Ten is now getting more and more heated, and it's a lot of fun to see a rivalry really, really develop as an actual true rivalry in the Big Ten at this moment, and it's great for Nebraska because they are now feeling like a fit in the Big Ten because of those matchups against a team like Iowa. It's just starting to look right. And that's where you end up saying, hey, they fit. It's going to take a little while to see USC and UCLA as a Big Ten school. But at this point, and I credit the Iowa-Nebraska development of the rivalry here, Nebraska-Iowa is a legit rivalry at this point. So with that being said, I know it's a little bit of a choke job with those 3 out of 4 losses late. They would be 3-2 at a point, which is fine position if they take care of their business to win the Big Ten West. But I still think that this Nebraska team is going to be pretty decent. I think they could give Michigan a run for their money, for sure. I think that a lot of these games that they lose, I think they could beat anybody on their schedule. The problem I have here with Nebraska is I think in year one of Matt Rhule, a young team, a young defense, as we talked about, I think there's going to be some hiccups that is going to come all throughout the season and learning experiences for some of these younger players that have to step up. And I mentioned Hartzog, Lenhart, and Human Milan as guys who potentially could make an impact as young players on defense, but they also could make an impact in a negative way. And I think that could potentially happen for Nebraska. So let me know what you think Nebraska is going to do down below in the comments section. I would really appreciate it if you guys interacted here. But with that being said, like I said, make sure you like and subscribe. Check out the TikTok, which is tagged right here with that name. Everybody, you have a good day, and we'll be back for the Kansas preview here in a little bit.